You cannot, under any circumstances, go to a donor and say, save me. We have to be the adults in the room, and we have to, as not-for-profit organizations, look at the situation at hand and create a compelling narrative around it that is solution-driven.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement. We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Rich Frazier. Today, we continue our series on the federal funding freeze and what it means for nonprofits. The immediate shock came from a now rescinded memo from the Office of Management and Budget, which attempted to freeze federal funds with little warning. Though that memo was blocked by a federal judge and later withdrawn, the chaos it triggered hasn't subsided, it's only grown. Since then, nonprofits across the country have faced delays, confusion, and funding losses. This ongoing uncertainty has revealed just how intertwined nonprofit stability is with government support and how quickly services can unravel when that support is disrupted. It's in this context that today's conversation takes place. What does it take to build real resilience when public dollars are at risk? We'll talk about how nonprofits can assess their vulnerabilities, shore up their strategies, and strengthen their internal systems to weather this storm, and we'll touch on when it makes sense to bring in outside help. To help answer these questions, we're joined by two guests. Beth Silverstein, nonprofit consultant with IPM Advancement, Silverstein Funding Solutions, and Vision Connect Nonprofit Consulting. She's got deep experience in funding strategy and capacity building, and she's also a returning guest to NPFX from our first episode in this series on federal funding. Beth, welcome back, and thank you for coming back to the show.
Nice to be here, Rich.
Our second guest appeared on NPFX last season, and I'm excited to have her back as well. Rosi, CEO of Housing Families, an organization at the front lines of the housing crisis in Massachusetts. Laura, welcome back, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Laura, I want to start with you with this conversation. Can you help describe for our listeners, first, how Housing Families responded to the funding freeze? And second, what have you been doing since then to mitigate the impact of the federal funding cuts?
Well, great questions. With Housing Families work, we do housing and homelessness on the one side, and then we couple that with mental health and well-being. So the two big buckets of funding at the federal level that we're watching have been the HUD dollars, Housing and Urban Development, and then the big looming threats about what's going to happen to Medicare and Medicaid. And I think since November, we've been hearing all the rhetoric. We've known all the intentions of what this administration planned to do if they were to win, which they did. So our first piece of business was really kind of separate from the funding, was just kind of looking at the people that we're serving. We have a lot of undocumented families. And so we really spent a lot of time thinking through how are we going to protect them and keep them safe. That seemed to be the most urgent, pressing piece.
Right.
Knowing that, okay, we are going to also have to deal with this funding piece. So luckily, my consultants were very good at keeping that on my radar. Like, what is going to be the impact if this money goes away? The impact so far has just been cuts in staffing at HUD. And we were worried that was going to result in a delay of funds coming in, their ability to distribute the funds. Fortunately, we haven't hit that yet. So we've just been working to prepare for the worst and getting word out to everybody about what the concerns are, checking in with other folks. What are their concerns? What are they hearing? And making sure that we're connected to up-to-date, accurate information, because there was such a flurry of executive orders going out and this has been frozen, this has been cut, and just trying to stay on top of all of it while coming up with a plan that we can talk more about later on. But that was our reaction to the transition in administration.
Beth, I want to turn to you now. In our first episode, you emphasized the importance of creating impact reports to assess which programs and services are most at risk. As a matter of fact, this is something that you're working with housing families on now. So, as a consultant, how do you help clients assess risk?
So, what we're all finding out together is just how deep and how complicated all of the funding is. There are numerous grants from numerous agencies and numerous sources that impact families very differently, impact the organization differently. And of course, from Laura's perspective, all of this is raining down upon her at one time. Trying to sort through it is an uphill climb. So, really trying to step back and take a deep breath and simplify it as best as possible. Looking grant by grant, what is most at risk? What do we think is going to happen if this grant goes away? Do we have the ability to plan for absorbing these families and these staff positions into our strategic plan and into our budget? What's going to have to, if something specific goes away, are staff vulnerable? Will we have to sunset programs? So, really trying to just step back and triage it. And then that will give you the biggest amount of information, because ultimately you need to see how many staff positions are affected, how many people are affected, and what do the dollars really look like? What dollars could we recover from other sources? And what dollars are we not going to be able to recover?
Right. So, Laura, as you and your staff are going through the risk assessment process, what kind of information are you gleaning from these risk assessments?
Right now, our biggest concern is, we run permanent housing, and HUD has a few different streams of funding different types of housing. And so in our assessment, we have some housing, about half of our housing stock has a permanent subsidy. It's like a more mainstream type of subsidy that's attached to it. That to me doesn't feel as high of a risk as some of these specialized programs that might be targeting special populations, or that are more like one-offs, where if you're an outsider looking in at the government, might just seem like, oh, well, what is this doing over here? Cut this, since that seems to be how they're doing it. So it's our permanent supportive housing for disabled head of households. It falls under McKinney funding, which is actually a federal education bill. That to me is at high risk of being cut because it is in this like weird location that might not make sense. And that would be absolutely catastrophic if we were to lose that. That every state has McKinney funding for this type of housing, and it would have a ripple effect across the country if that were to go away. And that is something that we get the rent through HUD and we pay it to the landlords. We would not be able to pay that on our own. So those kind of nuanced, specialized programs that are more outside the mainstream, to me, are the ones that we're really looking at and trying to come up with a worst case scenario plan for what we'll do with those folks. And then in terms of on the Medicare, Medicaid side, Beth was talking about grants, but a lot of the federal dollars that come in are not just in the form of grants, but they're fee for service and reimbursement, or through healthcare, health insurance. And we've been building out our capacity to do some housing work on the medical side, where housing is a social determinant of health. And I will say, with the rhetoric, we've seen this administration is acting how they said that they would. They're making true on their word. And so where they've talked so much about cutting Medicare, Medicaid, where before that was a program you could be reasonably certain was going to stay safe because it was supported by Democrats and Republicans, that feels much more at risk. And so we've been working on building out our infrastructure. And before I was thinking, this is a good financial risk for housing families. We can give a little bit more risk than we would have maybe otherwise. But now we're pumping the brake, like, slow down. We're still building it out, but it is much more on the periphery that this could be something that's built, and maybe pull back on the amount of risk we're willing to take in building it out.
So you bring up a good point there, Laura, that some of your core programs are really highly dependent upon these federal funds and reimbursement programs. So, Beth, I'm going to look back at you now. Can we talk about some of those strategies that organizations can be taking to diversify their funding sources in the future?
Sure. I think that this call to action for all of us is a call to look really internally in a different way. Like at Housing Families, we're looking at our people who've been with us for so many years. We have donors who've been supporting us for 15 years. They love us. They care about us. This is the time to really connect with them in a very meaningful way. And what we're finding in those conversations is that they seriously want us to succeed, and they are waiting for us to, talk to them about how best they can help. So I do think that, really relooking at your strategic plan and where you have opportunities to grow your philanthropy is, of course, the number one. If you have sources of actual revenue, those business models have to be fully developed. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to actually expand with our opportunities for bringing in additional leadership. We're going to need some skill sets, some really solid business brains to come alongside us and really help us think through some of these strategies. Is there an opportunity to buy property? Is there an opportunity to sell property? Is there an opportunity to increase rents? We have to put every possible thing we can think of on the table.
So, Laura, I know that Housing Families has been exploring other avenues for revenue and philanthropy as well, too. Yeah.
Well, we sure have. We've known for a long time that we need to diversify our revenue. And, if there's one benefit to come from all the chaos, it's reinforcing that if you want to be a healthy nonprofit working, you can't be overly reliant on one source of funding. So for us, this is really an opportunity. We've been talking about this need for years. And yet it takes a lot of work to get the buy-in of what that's going to look like for us, where we were really low. I think 95% of our money is government contracts, a mix between federal, municipal, and state. But we've always kind of coasted on that. And so we've never really been strong at the philanthropic side. Luckily, we had already been working with you and Beth on our strategic plan and really honing in on building up the philanthropic dollars coming in. So for us, this is a time to just show everyone this is why we got to do it. And we got to build those relationships. And so it's a helpful time to just get the buy-in, I think, from everyone, because for some agencies, this is going to be a big cultural shift, and getting the buy-in of everyone to be part of it, because one person can't do it on their own. You got to build your spider web of people that are going to go out and tell your story. So that buy-in and alignment piece is important. But that's been on our strategic plan. Fortunately, for the past year, we've been already building in that infrastructure.
I'm going to pick up on where you just left off, because we know that good governance and having a bold strategic plan factor into building resilience. A year ago, I worked with you and your board to develop a bold strategic plan, but now we're having to re-examine some of those goals right now.
Yeah, but I would say that all of the goals I don't think our goals are going to change. So it's good because we had a foundational agreement on the 5 core areas that were going to be important for the health of the organization. Mm-hmm. What I think changes, and we'll see because we have to go through it with everybody, but what I think is going to shift this time around is just the urgency and the priority around the philanthropic relationship building. Yeah. But everything else that we put in there is relevant today. We talked about building collaboration and partnerships with other folks. We talked about being a leader in advocacy and building relationships with elected officials, with your cities. And we can change our work, we can adjust to federal cuts here and there, but at the end of the day, we also need to tell our elected officials what's going wrong and try to address it systemically as well. So we have a lot of good stuff in there that I think will remain relevant. It's just the kind of shift in priority and urgency that we're feeling right now.
Well, I think that's evidence to really staying true to yourself as an organization and knowing as an organization, as leadership, as a board, where we want to go, as an organization, but recognizing that we have to be able to flex and adapt to the world around us. And maybe how we reach those goals might look a little differently than what we thought it looked like a year ago. And I think that's what we're really re-examining. I know also, because we've been working together on your strategic plan, that you as an organization has always collaborated with other nonprofits in the area who are in that same housing space that you're in. Can you talk a little bit about how the current realities are causing you to lean into your partnerships a little bit more or differently?
The piece we've talked about so much is that the housing crisis in Massachusetts is just so huge, and there's not like one fundraising goal where housing families is going to solve the whole problem for the state. But what are the segments? What can we do well? And who are the people that are lined up where we can either look geographically, maybe limiting, or with some of our demographics? And so in talking to some other executive directors, I mean, I think there is an understanding, because we also, as you mentioned in the beginning, we have a lot of changes at the state level that are having a big impact on nonprofits like Housing Families. So that's the other piece of it. So it is really a time for us all to be looking at our sustainability between the state cuts and the federal risks of, where can we partner? Nobody, I think, is ready to say, "Oh, I'm going to merge with this agency." Nobody's there, but we all are aware that there might be something. And so having these conversations and finding those like-minded agencies where your culture is aligned and your approach is aligned, and starting to do some of that problem solving together of like, well, what can we do reasonably, and kind of mapping out what that would look like and beginning to broach those and act upon those. It's kind of like the dating scene in the nonprofit world now, like see who you want to go on this venture with, and partnering with fundraising, partnering with the services that you're offering, knowing that at some point there might be drastic changes in our world here. So that's where we're at. We're talking to a few different folks that have been really good partners.
Beth, as a consultant, how would you help nonprofits explore collaborations if they haven't done that sort of thing in the past?
So I love everything that Laura is doing, and she's doing exactly what needs to be done. One of the places to start, and we're already looking at this too, is many of the private foundations and funders are funding a lot of the same organizations. So we have, there could be 3 or 4 folks in our space doing similar, not the same, but similar work. And we are all on that same funding schedule. So as we see tightening coming from the trickle down of funding that we may or may not be able to depend on, we also have to recognize that everybody's going to go to the same funders. And there'll be it's like a run on the bank. There will be this just massive run on our funding sources, our private funding sources. So in areas where we do share funders, it would make a lot of sense to start having some conversations about teaming up and looking at the programs that that our funders are funding, and seeing what makes sense with perhaps a collaborative approach instead of everybody running individually to a funder and creating competition. We might be able to do even better if we created some collaboration on some of these alternative funding sources.
So I want to take that and pull that thread a little bit more, because you're talking a little bit about sort of being more efficient in that. And I want to go down that road of operational efficiency. How do you as a consultant approach that conversation with your clients about operational efficiency and helping them to be more efficient, or even identifying operational inefficiencies?
So I think that all not-for-profits run pretty lean. There's always a problem with staffing. There's never enough people. There's never enough resources to do what needs to be done. A lot of times what that ends up doing and kind of manifesting is staff who are distracted, so you've got staff who are putting out this fire and planning this event, but I need to call this person. So you've got a lot of distraction. And I think that at the end of the day, what we've been trying to do is pull us back in a little tighter and get everybody in a lane and kind of stop the distraction and get some focus down the journey toward our strategic plan implementation.
Right.
And I think that when you have chaos coming from above, it creates that feeling of frenzy. Laura, wouldn't you say that? Kind of like there's just this feeling organizationally wide. So, how do we keep that from tearing us down? How do we make sure that we get everybody like, you got your job, you know what you're doing, you're going after these KPIs? And I think that I really think that at the end of the day, that's where we want to be. We don't want to let ourselves get so moving from thing to thing to thing to thing. We really want to focus.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
Beth, how do you help clients articulate a clear and compelling narrative that highlights their mission's impact, especially in this sort of ultra-competitive funding climate?
So this is a big deal. And it's hard. It's really hard because we are living amidst crisis, chaos, and uncertainty. So how do you craft a highly compelling case for support that doesn't say, save me? And you cannot, under any circumstances, go to a donor and say, save me. So it has to be solution-driven. We have to be the adults in the room, and we have to, as not-for-profit organizations, look at the situation at hand, create a compelling narrative around it that is solution-driven. It can't be, we need to tell them the facts. This number of families is at risk, and this is what's going to happen, and we know that these are the facts. But here's how we're going to address the facts. And we would like for you to come along with us.
It's never about us. It's about those that we serve. So, Laura, can you share an example of how Housing Families is using messaging and storytelling to make a strong case for what you do?
So there's the strong case for support that goes to the human, just heart side of things and the empathy. And that's really building on, we've really been much more intentional about elevating our success stories and educating staff why you should share the stories with the development team so we can get them out there to the public, and just showing the successes and the happiness and kids' faces, the things that people just like to see. But we also talk a lot about actual costs, like that we are doing work that has a cost benefit for the healthcare system or for the housing system. And we've hired people to do return on investment reports for us that will show for every dollar you invest in this program, there's a $6.75 return on your investment. So no matter which type of thinker you're approaching, if it's the emotionally driven one or if it's the fiscally, like, how are you doing this? We have our data points ready to go. So I would say there's not just one strategy for the case for support. there's a couple. And then a lot of it is relationships with the cities. So not on the private side, but getting their trust and their buy-in, and your reputation and being able to follow through. When you have that, the cities, we can turn to them and they're going to support us because we've built that trust and we've built that relationship.
Laura, I love that you included in your storytelling advocacy and empathy and success and cost and impact and ROI. That's quite the job. Is that something a consultant can help with? You need somebody to filter through all this sort of stuff?
Yeah, you need someone to tease through all those layers and the feasibility study. What's going to be the one that resonates? Is it going to be the cost savings? Is it going to be the human story? And which human story? So the consultants are helping us tease through that because in-house we don't have the capacity to do all of that.
So for listeners who are thinking that they could benefit from a consultant's help through the federal funding crisis or at any time, what advice can we give them for choosing the right consultant? And Laura, I'm going to start with you because you have experience in choosing consultants, not just us, but you have other consultants on contract.
Yeah, definitely finding the right consultant is key. So be very clear on what it is that you want them to do and what you want to achieve. Having regular check-ins and regular communication to make sure things are moving forward is also important. Especially, it'd be great if they're the ones driving that. Beth is so good at reminding us every week, we need the case for support, we need this, so that we don't go too far down our paths of our day-to-day. But I would be interviewing for cultural fit. Rich had to experience my interview for him. You were having your floors done that day. I will still remember trying to determine cultural fit here, if he was going to be a good one. And people that really understand where you're at as an agency and not just be like, well, you're missing this or you're missing that. Yes, we know. And that's why we need your help, and can work with you where you're at and map out a plan to show you how you kind of move forward and what you realistically can achieve. Those are the pieces. The cultural fit, I cannot stress enough, and just the adaptability to work with different working styles and get things done. And obviously that have experience, that really know what they're talking about, that that know these nuances and can help you, can understand the complexities of your work and help you share what's important and leave the other detail stuff behind to help you get your message out there. So
Beth, can you give us your perspective as a consultant?
Sure. So there are so many great consultants out there, and there's so much knowledge to be had. And there's so many different styles of consulting. So finding that right combination of, do I just need someone who's just going to just give me some advice and help keep me on the right track? Or do I need somebody that's going to dive a little bit deeper and actually do some of the stuff? Is this someone who can augment my team, or is this someone who can just guide my team? These are really important nuances that you kind of have to ferret out when you are looking for that right fit person. And always it boils down to chemistry. We've all had relationships that have gone south, or we've got relationships that have blossomed. It's usually comes down to chemistry and communication, making sure that everybody's on the same page, that if something needs to be written, you write it. If something needs to be done, you do it. It's really finding just kind of that right person who can be coach and communicator and help you think through things and ask questions that make you think, and sometimes dive in with, and do the actual work that needs to be done that sometimes, most often, staff might do, but sometimes you just need a little extra help.
Yeah. Team member working right alongside. Before we go, I want to ask you, what's one thing that you want listeners to take away from this conversation? It doesn't have to be anything that we've talked about, or it can be something that we've talked about. So Laura, I'm going to start with you.
My biggest takeaway for the nonprofit leaders out there is that this is really an opportunity for us to have a reality check on the importance of having a healthy organization. And that can mean diversified revenue stream, and to really just pause and look at your programming and look at your revenue sources and strengthen and figure out a plan for how to strengthen everything and really be strong and healthy, and having that strategic plan in place. And then when crises like this come up, you're not as frazzled because you already have that solid foundation, so you can take some hits. So we don't know what the hits are going to look like for us, but I do know that Housing Families is going to be fine in one way or another. We might look different. What we can offer might be different. How many people we can serve might be different. But I am very confident at the end of the day, Housing Families isn't going to collapse. And that's because we had our strategic plan in place. We do have different sources of funding. We can do better. We're going to do better. But just get those foundational pieces in place now.
Beth?
So that's really great advice, Laura. And just to piggyback on that, in this crisis moment, sometimes it does help to just have a sounding board. And I think that what has been most rewarding for me in this relationship was that we could really bounce back and forth. As the chaos was spinning, we could really kind of pause and think through it. And I think that keeping a level head, getting the whatever coaching it is we need, is going to be what saves the day ultimately, is just having a good, solid plan, like Laura mentioned.
Terrific. Beth, Laura, thank you so much for your contributions today. One last thing before we go, where can listeners find out more about you? Beth.
You can find me at Beth at visionconnectllc.com.
Terrific. And Laura?
And Housing Families, to learn more about us, www.housingfamilies.org.
And we're always happy to put a spotlight on Housing Families.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Love Housing Families. This has been a great conversation, my friends. Good to see you, Beth and Laura, again. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to our producer, Mr. Curtis Schmidt. Thank you, sir. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.